For the final reflection for EDCI Spring 27, I'm going to start with part one, which is creating your own understanding of instructional design and project management. So in my original graphic representation that we made in week 2, I put a balance in the center because I felt that project management and instructional design really balanced each other out, that there was kind of a give and take to both. I put a rope in my design to show that they were intertwined with one another, and I put words around the sides because I felt that those 6 words really represented both project management and instructional design in a balanced way. So that was how I felt in week 2 of the class. So what I wanted to keep the same in my new representation is I did want to keep the rope because I do feel that instructional design and project management do have a really intricate relationship with one another, and I think that the rope represents that well. I also wanted to keep on there the client expectation portion, because if you don't have stakeholder buy-in in the project that you're managing or in whatever it is that you're designing, the training, if you don't have those client expectations and you don't have stakeholder buy-in, nothing is going to end up going the right way for you. I also feel really strongly that the initial planning and the analysis phase, which I originally put on there, is truly the most important part, and that you can really make and break a project by how well you do the initial analysis. If you do it well, and if you understand, the objectives and client expectations, and you right from the beginning understand the learners and you know exactly what's going on, I feel that a project is way more likely to be successful than if you skip those initial steps. What I did choose to change is I wanted to separate the words into different categories, because there are some aspects where I feel that instructional design and project management really overlap, and there are others that I feel fall more to an instructional designer or more to a project manager. So I just kind of split those words up a little bit. I felt that ID was really more about creating the deliverables, and evaluation was a large part of instructional design. I also felt that budget and scheduling was really more of a project manager's job. It's not that project managers don't create deliverables and evaluate, and it's not that instructional designers shouldn't be conscious of budget and scheduling. I just feel that those fall typically more to one side or the other. That's why I kept all the words in the same graphic, because even the ones that I put into categories, it's not that they don't overlap, it's just that I think some things fall one way or the other. I also changed my graphic from a simple balance into a balancing rock structure. I felt that the balancing rocks really represented, each rock might be a part of PM or ID or both, but I think what makes the balancing rock so interesting is that they all rely on one another, and that if you remove one, the whole thing kind of crumbles or wobbles and doesn't work the right way. So I think it's more than just a simple balance of the two, but it's really a reliance on each other, and a really intricate relationship between the rope and the rocks. And then over on the right side, you can see how from the original design, where I just had those 6 terms kind of moving around the center. In the new design, I split them a little bit more so that I felt that communication, initial planning, and client expectations were huge parts of both instructional design and project management, while the deliverables and evaluation fell a little more towards the ID side, and the budget and the scheduling and timing was a little more towards the PM side. So I updated the graphic because as I was going through this class, I realized that project management is a lot more big picture and maybe a little more general, and ID is a little more specific, maybe a little more creative. So even though they both follow a process, project management includes so much more about the project that instructional design doesn't. Project management is including things like cost estimation and schedule development, risk management, communication plans between different teams. There's different review cycles, whereas ID, you're focused more on communicating only within your own group and looking more at something like Dick and Carrie or Addie, where you're creating a specific training or deliverable and not so much as at the big picture of, cost and schedule and things of that nature. So examples from the team studies where sometimes, we see them overlapping or maybe not, is in the Scott Hunter case. Scott was not named the project manager. Claire Campbell was named the project manager, but he absorbed a lot of the duties because even though he wasn't the PM, a lot of those instructional design duties kind of crossed over. In the David Jimenez case, David moved from a position as an IDer to a project manager. And that was really the case that I realized that these two don't overlap as much as I originally thought. David had a lot of issues going from his role in just instructional design to having all the responsibilities of a project manager. And that's kind of when I realized how much more being a project manager entails. In the Scott Allen case, he was an instructional designer, and he was a lot more focused on just the content and the design of those learning objects and those original briefs, and not so much the overall project. So the explanation, I found a couple of quotes from Horan where he describes project management as planning, organizing, implementing, leading, and controlling the work of a project to meet goals and objectives, where I feel that, like I said, instructional design doesn't necessarily, you're not looking at the goals of the overall big picture project. You're looking at more of the goals of just the design portion. He also talks about how it is the process of managing the competing demands and trade-offs between desired results and the natural constraints of the project. So even though instructional design does have to be conscious of scope and budget and cost, project management is really trying to problem solve more between those different things. So after seeing those case studies, project management is just broader. It's a lot more general. So in part 2, when we're talking about experience with my past projects, I feel like after this class, all of my past projects have pretty much been negative. And Horan discusses a lot of common reasons for troubled projects. And most of the issues that I have had have been lack of the buy-in from the stakeholders, where you start a project and you kind of ask, why are we doing this? What's going on? And they don't have a lot of confidence in the project, and they don't really care about it that much, and you can tell. And that made me not care about it and not really want to do anything. It felt like a checklist that they were forcing me to do. I think the other issue I've had with past projects is just poor communication, where in the beginning I didn't know the expectations. I was unsure of when is this due, are certain parts of it due, and then follow through. I worked on a project most of last summer, and no one ever did anything with it. There was no follow through, there was no checking in on it, there was no using it for anything, so it felt like a huge waste of my time. I think the attributes of a good project or team leader are people that believe in their team, that are extremely organized, are very clear about different roles and responsibilities, and are also really transparent with successes and issues that arise. I think that a good project manager really keeps their team and everybody, all the stakeholders, in the loop as much as they can, so that if there are issues, they're not trying to problem solve themselves, but they're getting the input of the team early enough that it can actually be helpful. One of the things Horan said that really stuck with me was that project managers should over communicate with their team, because then you're not making assumptions, you're not trying to do everything on your own. So techniques that I've used in project management is, as the team leader of the chemistry classes at the high school I work at, I throw out weekly emails for my team where I'm just checking in for questions, checking on the status of whatever it is that they're creating, sending out reminders for putting in orders, just to make sure that we're all constantly on the same page. Twice a month, we get together and we're either working on deliverables like final exam review packets, tests, note packets, labs. We're talking in a group. We're setting different things up. And then I also use Google Keep and a shared Google Drive so that everyone has all of the same information. I can share resources with my team. I can show upcoming meetings to them so that we're all on the same page. There's never any surprises. So what I've learned about PM, I would say the main things, because we've learned quite a bit in the last 8 weeks, but I think that a lot of projects would go smoother if more project managers actually use the steps and resources that we've discussed in this class. I think a lot of people are kind of pushed into a managerial role that they haven't necessarily asked for or been trained for, so they don't know a lot of what we learned in this class, and their lack of knowledge really puts different projects at risk. There was a graphic in the Wellman article that we read one of the first weeks of class that really stuck with me as well, that shows that when a leader is able to influence a project in the initial planning phases, they can be less involved later because that initial planning, when everything gets done, if it's done correctly, they don't need to be as involved in the end because everything is off to a good start. But if the project manager isn't there in the beginning and they don't know what's going on, they're going to have to clean up a lot of messes at the end, and they're really going to have to struggle at the end of the project to get everything tied together the right way. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that I really think that a project you can make or break a project in the way that you plan and analyze at the very, very beginning. I also learned a lot about project definition documents, what those mean and what they entail, a lot about risk management, which I found really interesting, about just planning for risks you know will happen instead of just trying to avoid all of them, and communication and how important communication can be. What I really want to know more about, though, is how do you know what a proper timeline is for a project? If you're not given a specific due date, or if they say how long you think this will take, how do you establish that? I also think it's interesting, project to project, how to get a cost estimation. How do you come up with that proper budget right from the beginning and be able to be close to it? How do you know what everything's going to cost? How do you know how long everything's going to take? I also, when I was reading about risk management, I really want to dive more into what that sweet spot is for risk management. How do you know how much to plan for without planning for so much that it's kind of overkill? Or how do you make sure that you're planning for enough that if something happens, you're not completely panicked? I also would be interested in a finalized contract. What do you actually include in the contract? What is just, more verbally spoken about at meetings? What kind of things get signed? So that's all aspects of project management that I'd like to know a little bit more about and do a little more research on. For future projects, I think the skills that I've obtained in this class is, again, understanding those initial planning steps, how to do it, what to include, having that definition document, the work breakdown structure, being able to, put the time and the effort into those objectives and everything before the project starts. I think I'm able to break down a project a little bit better into manageable objectives and parts now that I've looked at, how do you define stakeholders? How do you figure out who's responsible for what? I think that a project is a little more manageable now instead of such a daunting task. I learned about a lot of different tools, especially in the wiki that we did that my classmates put together. So I did a presentation on Trello. There was some on fishbone diagrams and Monday.com that I thought were really interesting ways of looking at project management. So all of those tools were really nice to have different perspectives. I like that I have an understanding of risk management, and I like that there is a way to plan for risks ahead of time and plan for that within a project. And I also like, because I've always said how important communication is, I like that I've learned a lot of different parts of communication, and I think now that I know more of them, I'll be even better at communicating as a project manager. I think the key takeaways I've taken from this class is that although project management and instructional design are similar, there are categories that overlap, there are categories that don't. They're definitely not the same thing, but I can understand how an instructional designer would take on a lot of the roles of a project manager. And I think as a project manager, you don't necessarily take on the role of an instructional designer, though. Um, I really think that the best project manager has to be great at multitasking. You have to keep a lot of people happy. You have to have stakeholder buy-in. You have to make sure your team is on your side. But since you are the one making the decisions, you have to make them and be really firm about them. If you're wishy-washy, you're not going to be able to, keep everyone organized and together. Um, I also think that one of the key takeaways I've had with reading all the case studies and the discussions is you need to just go into your projects knowing that not everything is going to work out, but as long as you have a backup plan, it will work out eventually. It's just not maybe going to go to your original plan. The main keys to project management, organization, initial planning, and really great communication. I use the Horn text and the 8 Habits of Successful Projects teams for this. I think I learned quite a bit from this class in the short 8 weeks we were in it, but I feel a lot more confident that if, as an instructional designer, I have to take on that project management role, that I would be able to do that and do it effectively.